Hello and welcome to a video I'm making where I'm going to go through a book I made called WIPE, short for Why International Peace Ended. I'm going to be taking you through various events from 1919 to 1939, describing them with information as well as cartoons published, and it will focus on answering one of history's central questions. Why had international peace collapsed by 1939? So there's the cover, hope you like it, and yeah, let's get started. So it starts with the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. Sorry, I had to write it in pencil because I forgot to write it on the computer. It's where it all began. It's the thing which put international peace on the road to collapse. So these are the terms of the treaty, the things which are agreed on. So Germany loses land, its army is reduced, reparations are made, Germany is forced to accept guilt for World War One, the League of Nations is set up, and some extra stuff too. And it forms the acronym GARGLE. But this brings up the problem of how harshly you'll punish Germany. In that regard, we got some serious disagreement. Because on one hand, you had Woodrow Wilson, the American president, and Lloyd George, the English Prime Minister, who wanted a fair punishment for Germany. Definitely punish it a bit, because, it could cause World War One, but not too harshly, because they might try to declare war out of anger in the future. On the other hand, you had Georges Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister, who wanted a nasty punishment for Germany, so he would cripple them and they wouldn't be able to attack France again. Clemenceau, he even went as far as to use Germany's severely weakened industry to revive France, which is represented in this cartoon, Clemenceau the Vampire, where you have this vampire who represents Clemenceau draining blood from this weak-old woman who represents Germany. He's draining its blood to make himself stronger, just like how how Clemenceau's draining Germany to get stronger. Those two bats are England and France in the background, and they're just watching helplessly. But this mistreatment would not turn out well, neither for Germany nor for France. Then that brings us to another cartoon, Peace and Future Cannon Fodder. The terrible consequences of Clemenceau's treatment towards Germany are represented in this cartoon. Well, you got Clemenceau, this guy, Woodrow Wilson, there, and the other important people. That little kid is Germany. He's naked to represent Germany's helplessness. He's crying because he knows by 1940 Germany is going to be in a bad state. The tiger, who's Clemenceau, says, "Curious, I seem to hear a child weeping," because he doesn't understand the consequences of how he's treating Germany. The League of Nations. The League of Nations, created by Woodrow Wilson, was an international organization made to stop war in Europe forever. It was joined by Belgium, France, England, and Italy. But ironically, its creator, the US, didn't. This made the League incomplete, as represented by this cartoon, The Gap in the Bridge. You have the League of Nations bridge. A bit of it was done by Belgium, a bit by France, a bit by England, and a bit by Italy. But it seems there's a bit of it left to be done, and the USA is meant to finish that part. You got Uncle Sam there, representative of America, because his initials are US, and he still has some work to do, but he's just chilling lazily. Which, the bridge is incomplete because he's not finished his work, which represents the League's incompletion without the US. And oh boy, did this have some bad consequences later on. So, before we get into the League's failure, we have to go over a very important person, Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini was the Italian leader at the time. He believed in fascism, a form of dictatorship where opposition is suppressed with force. He was a big problem to the League for many reasons. One, with Mussolini being from Italy, a member of the League, they had to be careful with him, or it could damage Italy's relationship with the League. Two, he was more than willing to use military force to get what he wanted, or to pay back mistreatment of Italy. And three, the League was rather weak militarily as it didn't have its own army. In order to battle, they'd have to go to the House of Parliament of a country that's part of it and ask for a vote to be able to use the country's army. All of these reasons why Mussolini was a problem to the League are highlighted in the League's first major failure. The Corfu Incident, 1923. This incident was caused by Benito Mussolini invading and occupying the Greek island of Corfu because Greeks murdered Tellini, an Italian who was sent by the Conference of Ambassadors to observe border regulations between Greece and Albania. Greece turned on the League for help. They created a judgment condemning Mussolini. Unfortunately, Mussolini refused to leave unless he got what he wanted. Eventually, the Greeks apologised and paid compensation. But only then did Mussolini leave. Although the dispute was settled in the end, the League of Nations failed because they weren't able to stop the issue themselves. Only because the person who caused the issue let it end. While it wasn't so bad here, as all Mussolini wanted was for the Greeks to apologise and compensate, what if the person responsible wants something much bigger, such as a large amount of land? Then it would be really bad. This also highlighted how problematic Mussolini was to the League. Not only did he respond to the murder in a way the League couldn't handle due to its military issues, but the League only quote-unquote won when Mussolini got what he wanted, which in this case wasn't so bad, but in another situation it could be far worse. The Manchuria Crisis, 1931 to 1933. In this crisis, Japan invades Manchuria, a part of China. By blowing up a railway and saying Manchurian terrorists did it as an excuse to enter. They did this for many reasons. To avoid tariffs, which are trading rules placed by the US and China, to contain a rapidly growing population and economy, and many more reasons. China appealed to the League of Nations, which after a very long trip due to less advanced transportations, arrived in Japan. After some investigation, Lord Lytton made a report saying Japan was unlawful. But once again, the League failed. Japan ignored the report and announced they were going to invade more of China. They also left the League, which was honestly a bad idea in my opinion, as now the League doesn't have to be as careful with Japan. Membership was one of the things which made Mussolini a problem. Abyssinia Crisis, 1935 to 1936. Manchuria is an area in Africa which Benito Mussolini invaded in October 1935. He did this not only to fulfill his ultimate goal, revive the Roman Empire, but also because there was a dispute between Italian and Abyssinian soldiers in a part of the of Abyssinia called the Walwal Oasis. Mussolini claimed that it was actually owned by Italy and he demands an apology or he'll invade. Mussolini was in the perfect position to do this as he owned African land right next to Abyssinia. Haile Selassie, the Abyssinian emperor, turned to the League for help. But yet again, the League failed to stop Mussolini. They could only reduce Mussolini's Abyssinian takeover with the Hohenlohe Pact, agreeing to give Mussolini the best trading cities of Abyssinia. The League's failure and weaknesses represented in the following cartoons. Suites of Aggression, where you got this guy who's Haile Selassie. He looks weak because his land has been destroyed. He's come to the League of Nations police station. He's like, have I got this right? He's taken nearly half of what I had. Now you gentlemen wants to discuss whether he should take more. So yeah, there's that. There's also the awful warning where you got Mussolini. He's holding a paper that says Abyssinia Dispute. And then you've got these guys, they represent the UK and France. They say, we don't want you to fight, but bajingo if you do. We shall probably issue a joint memorandum suggesting a mild disapproval of you. They're dressed like idiots and they're talking like idiots, which represents how weak the League is and the fact that they're a joke to Mussolini, who's much more serious. And yeah. So those are the League's main failures. Now we get to the person who really collapsed international peace, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was the German leader at the time. Like Mussolini, he believed in fascism, as well as anti-Semitism, which is the hatred of Jews. He wanted to, 1, abolish the Treaty of Versailles, 2, expand German territory, and 3, defeat communism. We know all this by a book Hitler wrote while in prison called Mein Kampf, meaning My Struggle. As we all know, Hitler was responsible for World War II. But what is slightly less universally known is the events with Hitler leading up to the declaration of war. We will now go over them. Rhineland rearmament, 1936. Oh, I should have put remilitarization, not rearmament, never mind. In March 1936, Hitler marched his army, which he'd been successfully rearming since 1933, into the Rhineland. This was a huge gamble, as Hitler's army was still weak enough for the British or French to easily defeat it if they wanted to, and German militarization of the Rhineland was prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles. Luckily for Hitler, the other countries were too preoccupied with Mussolini and the Abyssinia crisis. His gamble paid off. Anschluss, 1938. On March 1938, Hitler's invasion turned towards Austria. Like the Rhineland remilitarization, this was illegal as Germany interacting with Austria had also been prohibited by the Treaty of Versailles. Last time Hitler invaded Austria, he had been stopped by Mussolini, but this time, having helped him in the Spanish Civil War, they were allies. Hitler agrees with Chancellor Schuschnigg to have a vote on whether or not Austrians want an Anschluss, which is a German-Austria union, as some Austrians did actually believe in the idea. There was even a Nazi party in Austria. Not wanting to risk losing the vote, Hitler sent troops into Austria under their observation. The vote for Anschluss won 99.75%. Although, like with the Rhineland remilitarization, Britain didn't respond militarily, they did increase British rearmament and considered making military service compulsory. Appeasement. Appeasement was a policy set up by the new Prime Minister of the UK at the time, Neville Chamberlain. It was the easy policy, and it believed in not treating Germany too harshly. I bring this up because it takes action in the next important Hitler event which led to World War II. Sudetenland Crisis, 1938. Originally, the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia had been owned by Germany, but the Treaty of Versailles agreed that it was given back to the Czechs. Hitler argued with Chamberlain about getting it back. Hitler said, "I give you my word of honor that Czechoslovakia has nothing to fear from the Reich." On September 19, 1938, they had another meeting called the Munich Agreement, agreeing to give Hitler parts of the Sudetenland. But 3 days later, Hitler asked for all of the land, claiming that the Czechs had mistreated the Germans. Chamberlain found it unreasonable and started moving it in the British Navy. War seemed just around the corner. Hitler captured the Sudetenland, and not long after the Lebensraum, which is a territory a nation believes is needed for the natural development of Czechoslovakia. The Munich Agreement and helplessness of Europe against Hitler's invasion are represented in this cartoon. You got this little boy, he's got a lollipop and he's surrounded by a bunch of snakes with Nazi symbols on it. He says, "Remember, one more lollipop and then you all go home." It's basically representing Chamberlain saying, you can have the Sudetenland and then you gotta stop. But as you can see by the position that boy's in, he's in no position to say that because, well, Hitler was already getting really strong and he's just that guy who he doesn't stop without military force. Nazi-Soviet Pact. With Hitler having captured Austria and Czechoslovakia, his next target was sure to be Poland. Knowing this, the Russian leader Joseph Stalin asked Britain for an Anglo-Soviet pact, agreeing that they would put troops in Poland to defend it if Hitler invaded. But Chamberlain hated Stalin due to his belief in communism, and Poles believed that if Russian troops entered Poland, they might not leave. So the talks failed. Knowing he'd have to face Hitler sooner or later, Stalin had an agreement with Hitler that he hoped would turn around Hitler's invasion, and would give Stalin time to develop an army for when he inevitably faces the Nazi leader. They agreed that Hitler would capture the west half of Poland, while Stalin would capture the east half. This was the Nazi-Soviet Pact, represented in this cartoon. That's Stalin, that's Hitler, and they're shaking hands, but they're doing it with a gun to show that they don't actually like each other. And this guy represents the world, and he's shocked, because the world was shocked to see Hitler working with Stalin. Blitzkrieg, 1939. On September 1st, Hitler, even under the threat from England that they'd declare war if he did so, invaded Poland. This was known as the Blitzkrieg. 16 days later, Stalin invaded East Poland, and after a battle called the Battle of Kock, they gained full control of Poland. And then World War II broke out. And that's the end of my book. That should hopefully answer history's central question. One of history's central questions. Hope you enjoyed.